Welcome to a special episode of Ammertime podcast. I am your usual host, Henry Miller, and today I'm lucky enough to have the opportunity to interview the head of the background and art team, Edward Murdoch. Now, today, this special episode, we're going to be discussing the new Sylvan Elf Army book, which is out tomorrow on the 17th of May. So this is a very exciting opportunity for me because I'm a Sylvan Elf player. And we're going to be discussing a few of the background stories and some of the artwork in the new book. And I'm going to try and get some inference into the new world of the Ninth Age and ask Edward some tough questions to see how much information I can get out of him for the new background. So stay tuned, listen in, and enjoy the show. So, welcome to a very special episode of, let's call it Ammertime podcast. I'm here today with Edward Murdoch on the forums that you can find him at Scottish Knight, correct?
Yep, that's right.
And Edward, you are the head of the background and arts team, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. For about 2 months now since Pip Hamilton, who used to lead up the team, had to step down for work commitments. So, the last 2 months that's been my role.
Fantastic. And so maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what the background and art team do, and what is your role as the head of this magical group of people?
Yeah, absolutely. So the background and art team is responsible for coming up with the official fluff and artwork that goes with each of the 16 factions that we have in Ninth Age. We're also developing a sort of overall world view to give players the grounding to be able to play their armies, not just as a basic rule set, but also to give them an identity and give them a flavour of what their army is in this world that we've created.
Yeah, and I think that's really important for the rules going forward and the game going forward, because if we can get people invested in the storyline, then it makes the games more cinematic. And that's exactly what we're here today to talk about. So, perhaps you would like to make the announcement, maybe what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, so today we are talking about the Sylvan Elf Army book, which will be released tomorrow when this video comes out. And hopefully it will be a really interesting experience, not just for Sylvan Elf players, although I hope that they will enjoy it first and foremost, but also for other players who are looking to get more of a feel of how the Ninth Age world sits and to just experience, hopefully, an interesting story for one of those factions.
Yeah, fantastic. So, let's just firstly, we've heard about what you do on the background and arts team, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself. Do you play Sylvan Elves yourself, or what armies do you play, or what armies are you interested in?
I don't play Sylvan Elves. I did the very first models that I collected when I started playing Warhammer back when, oh God, sometime in the 90s, were Wood Elves, actually.
Okay.
So they were certainly an early interest of mine. I then went on to playing Orcs and Goblins and have endless hordes of greenskins, although, to be honest, quite a lot of them are greyskins due to being affected.
Yeah, we all have that problem.
Yeah. And then in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, I've started collecting what are now Equitane, Kingdom of Equitane. So obviously my screen name on Ninth Age forums is a bit of a
giveaway there.
But yeah, so that's my current modelling project.
Yeah. Okay, so how many people were actually involved in writing this book that we're going to talk about? And you told me that you were responsible for writing certain parts of it?
Yeah, so we had a lead writer, so each book will have a different lead writer, and there'll be someone who is interested in the faction and has a particular connection with that. So we had the lead writer who wrote a lot of the material, and then all of our other writers also contributed some work towards it. So I did two of the main stories, plus the pieces about the gods, one of the poems which was released last week, and a few other bits and pieces. So in total, we had about 6 writers, about the same number of artists, and also our review team who pulled the book together and actually turned it into the finished product that people will be seeing tomorrow.
So how long do these books actually take? Because it seems like there's a lot of people involved and a big process around it.
Yeah, there's definitely a very involved process. So generally, the books take somewhere in the region of about 3 months to put together. A lot of that time comes down to giving the artists enough time to properly develop their works and put those onto paper or onto screen. Also, by the time we've done an initial write of the stories, we then have to edit them together. We then have to proofread them. We have to pull in the rules. So, yeah, as much as we would love to be able to put out an army book every month, but obviously we want to spend as much time as it takes to get a finished quality product.
And I must say, I've obviously had a look at this book, being a privileged content team member. And I am really impressed with the quality. I think it is fantastic, and we're going to show a few pictures today from the book, some screenshots that I've taken, and we're going to talk about that. So today I'd like to talk about. There's going to be 4 sections to this kind of interview. We've had the first introductory section. We're also going to talk a little bit about the character of the Sylvan Elves, like how they're designed to be in the story in the new edition, and also this actual storyline that we're going to talk about some of the elements that are in the new Sylvan Elf book, and we're going to maybe discuss, if we're allowed to, some of the elements that come up in the story, at least I found interesting. And finally, we're just going to talk a bit in general about how this book and what we can see in this book and the rest of the world. So I think we'll dive right in. So my first question is the new Sylvan Elves. How do you say this? It says it's called Trewi, I think.
Yeah, and that's how I would pronounce it.
Yeah, when I read it, I was like, is it Trewi?
Yeah, one of my colleagues actually thought it was Trevi. So I did put in a question to our linguistics expert. I haven't heard back yet, but I think it will be Trewi.
Trewi, yeah. It's okay. I just thought when it was like Trewi, I was like, Trewi?
I don't think it's Trewi.
I don't think it's Trewi. Yeah, so Trewi is the new name for the cultural name, I guess, for the Sylvan Elves.
And each of something that I think is really fascinating about the work that was started quite a long time ago and has been building up is the level of linguistic independence and unique languages that are being put together for each of the 16 factions. So they shouldn't feel like just generic fantasy. They should feel like they have a real grounding in the world and that they've developed, and that's something that with the Sylvan Elves there are a few sort of hints to it during the book that they have their own unique language, and we could put together quite a lot of concepts based on the language that we already have for them.
Yeah, that's really interesting actually, because actually the first question that I wanted to ask you really about the book was what identity do the new Sylvan Elves have? Because in fantasy there's so many different woodland elf identities. Like you have the Tolkien kind of fairy wood elves that like kind of sit in the woods and feast all day, and then the kind of the fluff that we're used to with Ariel and Orion, and also maybe some kind of like general elven themes, which is like noble and aristocratic. Like we also have this kind of like druids, wild nature kind of thing. Like where do the Ninth Age Sylvan Elves fit into this kind of box of woodland elves?
Yeah, so I think all the various woodland elf interpretations, they're all roughly on a lot of the same themes, or they deal with a lot of the same issues, and it's really the individual portrayals that I think give you the unique character. So Tolkien had a more benevolent, I suppose, view of them, and I think one of the topics that was discussed around Sylvan Elves in Ninth Age is the sort of fey background, this sort of capriciousness, this unknowable nature of what elves are. And I think that Sylvan Elves in particular are the most obvious vehicle for that sort of mysticism that humans would attach to it. You know, highborn elves obviously they go out of their way to be seen. Dread elves want to be known, they want to be feared. And so you have Sylvan Elves as this counterpoint to those two, taking a more secretive, a more hidden approach to their life. And so we wanted to give the impression that there is a lot going on that doesn't necessarily get explained or doesn't necessarily follow human logic. So that's really I think that's taking the sort of interpretations that have gone before, but bringing in more fey and more pagan aspects to flesh out their cultural view.
Okay, I think what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show the first picture, and I think you should be able to see it on the screen share now. So this is one of the pieces of artwork from the new Sylvan Elf book, and this is one that I really liked. I thought it was quite Tolkien-y in a way, with the dragon and the mountains, and just the kind of the lone figure on the tree. And I think this is quite indicative of how at least the kind of the theme and the feel that I got from the Sylvan Elves, like you say, kind of hidden, watching, and also with the dragon kind of brings in the old fantasy element of it. And this was just one of the ones that I highlighted from the book that I really liked. Just a small piece of artwork. I don't know if you want to comment on this picture on anything or.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, this was a picture that was come up with as, you know, a lot of the individual units have their own pictures, so there are specific artworks for each of those, and this is a more general take on some of the Sylvan Elf storyline and turning that into a piece of artwork. So I agree, I think this is a beautiful bit of artwork, and also what this makes me think, because I'm primarily a writer as opposed to an artist, but this makes me think of the story arcs that could come from just a glimpse into the Sylvan Elf world like this. The idea of, you know, the idea of forest dragons, which is already quite an interesting concept. They're a bit of a mixed bag, really. You know, fire within a woodland realm, not usually something that you would seek out or you would ally with. But dragons bring this high fantasy aspect to the Sylvan Elves. So I love the idea of thinking about what a dragon would bring into the Sylvan Elf world.
Yeah, I think obviously I don't know if you follow any of our podcasts at all, but if you do, then you know that I'm an avid dragon user, and so that's obviously something that's close to my heart. So I think what I'd like to discuss now is actually the map of the Sylvan Elves realm. So here you can see the map from the Sylvan Elf book. Now, where is this kingdom in the world? Like, where does it lie?
Yeah, so I don't want to necessarily give away everything about the world map, because the world map will come out with the full rule book. But I can say this is definitely in the heart of our sort of Western Europe setting. And
okay, now maybe you're giving too much away. Is it going to be set in Western Europe or?
Not the entire game, but the Sylvan Elf aspect, the Sylvan Elf heartland, if you like, will definitely be part of the Western Europe area.
Okay, and so this is obviously the main kingdom of the Sylvan Elves, like where maybe let's just say where they come from. Is there going to be other Sylvan Elf communities or other forests where they live around Europe, or is it just going to be all in one place? How's it going to work in that respect?
So definitely. Then this is something that with every one of our 16 factions, we don't want to have them geographically pinned down to just one place. We don't want to have your possibilities, your kind of scope to hold battles limited by what the geographic setting of the story is. So with each of our factions, we've envisaged how they might find homes in other areas in the world. So if you want to play a Sylvan Elf army that are desert dwellers and they protect small oases in the desert, or you want to imagine your Sylvan Elves being based in thick jungle territory, either anything like that, we want to leave people with the freedom to imagine how they could take the Sylvan Elf archetypes and the framework and apply it to all sorts of interesting situations in the world.
Okay, and these towns that you can see around the forest, we have Gascon, Coranta, Ashau. These are kind of named towns. Are these Kingdom of Equitane towns? At least from the story that you get in the book, you would think so.
Yes, and Coranta particularly is mentioned in the stories. Some of them are Equitane, some of them are Sonstal. There's an element of both in the map.
So could you maybe say that the Elven Kingdom borders the two realms?
Yes, it would definitely be easy to say that it borders on the two primary human realms.
Okay, fantastic.
At least primary in the sense of the ones that we have armies for. There are a lot of other human nations and human realms in the Ninth Age setting, which there'll be more details about them to come.
Fantastic. One question I do have: we have in the story the kingdom itself is referred to as, I want to say, Wiscan.
Yes.
And also we have in the army list an item which is called the Bow of Wiscan. So is this the like the Elvish name for the forest, or is this the human name for the forest, or it's actually spelled differently in both cases? So is that one and the same?
Yes. So there's again, this is part of our linguistic development. So we took the idea that the elves themselves would have a name for the forest, and that some of that information would find its way into human ways of thinking. Obviously, they wouldn't necessarily know how to spell those same words, but we wanted to give that sort of connection between the two cultures.
Okay, and how do you come up with these like interesting names like Trewi and Wiscan and I don't know how you pronounce this one in the middle. Maybe you can pronounce it for us. The Yishwishthai or something.
Yeah, Ishwithal, I think.
Ishwithal, that's quite cool.
I cannot take any credit for naming. It's probably the single area that I dread most, is trying to come up with names for things. But fortunately, we have a really great complementary set of skills on the background and art team, and one of them is, as I mentioned, our linguistics expert, who, to be honest, if he doesn't write a PhD about the Ninth Age, he's doing himself a disservice, because he's done a huge amount of work to come up with individual place names and following on from themes that he has set out to. So the languages evolve as well. There are old forms of names which become modern, and it's really a fascinating sort of bit of work.
So just following on from that as well, if you can see this map, I think, and so can the viewers. So I count two named kind of tree places in this realm of Wiscan. We have the Ushwithal and the Ganamli.
Yes, I think so.
Could you maybe just explain if these are like relevant places or what happens at these places? I mean, in the old fluff we had these kind of tree halls or something like that where the main characters lived, and in the story we hear about this giant willow that the character is captured in. We're not going to say any more than that. But
sure, yeah.
This little picture here to me looks like a giant willow. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about these two places.
Yeah, so the Ishmael, it definitely features in the story. I'm not sure that Ganamli does, but really, I mean, some of the locations which are shown, like the bridge as well over the river, which is further up and doesn't have a specific name, but these are sort of just to give a bit of flavour as to what exists in the woodland realm. And Ishmael is sort of the heart of much of this story that we've told. But again, what we don't want to do is we don't want to set out just one location or one place that everything is centered from. This we want to leave as much scope as possible for players to populate the world with their own stories. So if someone wants to describe a grove in the north of Wiscan and wants to set their story there, we would love to see that, and we'd love to read about it. So these are locations which are central to the story that we're telling, but they're not necessarily central to every story that will come from the Sylvan Elves.
Okay. So I think the big elephant in the room for me, at least, is the issue of the Forest King. Now, we hear a little bit about the Forest King constantly, actually, throughout the story that's told in the new book. Maybe you could tell us something about the Forest King, because he's described in the book as having these kind of emerald eyes, and maybe he's a god, or like who is the Forest King? Could you just maybe like explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so the Forest King is a being who lives within, or is certainly seen within Wiscan. His relationship to the elven pantheon of gods is not straightforward, and that's deliberate. We wanted to leave that air of mysticism about him and about his role, but he is most definitely the leader of the Wild Hunt, and that's something which might feature in the book. But yeah, so he fulfills this kind of Cernunnos-like pagan role of this wild leader of this primal hunt, which is a great part of those kind of pagan traditions, and I think that fits nicely into what we were trying to do with the Sylvan Elves.
Yeah, I think if you mind, I'm just going to read out a little quote that I wrote down. So,
Yeah,
Cadaron, the Forest King, leader of the Wild Hunt, an avatar of the hunter, or perhaps the god himself, clothed in flesh. He rules the forest beside his queen, Amaril, and from their union sprang forth the twins Sura, bringer of spring, and Seema, the winter princess. So, here it seems that the king also has a queen. So we don't hear much about the queen in this in the book. So perhaps you could maybe just tell us a little bit about who the queen is and what she represents in the Sylvan Elf background.
yeah. So the king and queen, they are bringing that sort of royalty, that noble line to the Sylvan Elves. They also, both of them, have a connection to the Elven pantheon, and the sections of the Sylvan Elf book which go into detail about the gods do give a bit of information about the different characters who sort of feature in that grouping. So the queen, the forest queen, is largely within our world, which we call the mortal realm, but she also spends time in the immortal realm, and so that's a distinction that we're making with the gods and our sort of divine or demonic entities, and drawing a distinction between the mortal realm and the immortal realm.
Okay, so the king and queen are kind of godlike figures that are both able to traverse these two realms,
Yes.
something like that.
Yeah.
So in the epilogue of the book, we're not gonna spoil too much of the story, but it seemed to me that the Forest King was reborn somehow, or at least maybe he appeared, or he was I wasn't even sure if he kind of got transformed by the Elven Lord that was in the story. The Elven Lord transformed into the Forest King. Like, maybe you could just kind of explain it a little bit, because I wasn't sure whether
Yeah,
he's being reborn or like in the old fluff, or is he just like a constant thing?
he's definitely constant in sense of always existing and always being part of the Sylvan Elf world. But what we wanted to get was this sense of occasion, the sort of pagan sense of festivals and special times of the year, and so there's a definite sense of importance to the actions that happen at the end of the book, and that ties into the Forest King and his appearance at the end of the book. So it's intended to be a time of ritual significance, and bringing about the Forest King's visit. But beyond that, again, this is part of the creating a mystical sense of the Sylvan Elves, that there are rituals that have purposes that don't follow human logic, and they don't necessarily lead just one to the next, but they obviously mean something to the Sylvan Elves, and they obviously have significance to them.
Okay, because also in the story, the Forest Lord that is present in the story, he's described as a bringer, and I wasn't really quite sure what that meant, and I kind of connected that he kind of brought about the Forest King in the epilogue at the end. Maybe you could explain that,
I think that's
or is that asking too much of you?
I think that's one that there are. What I will say is there are definitely clues in the book that will give you more information about the Forest Lord and about his connection to the circumstance, the sort of characters that we name in the book. So I don't want to give it all away. I think people will enjoy reading around that. But there's definitely material in the book.
Yeah, I've only read it through twice, so I missed a few things. Is this storyline, is it going to evolve? Is there going to be progress for the characters, or I mean we only heard about a very few characters, and you kind of got a little bit about each unit. But is there going to be like a red thread storyline that kind of ties all the books together, or that progresses as the story evolves, as the ninth age evolves?
Yeah, so the army books they're not sort of telling one grand story, or they're not sort of telling an individual series of stories. These are sort of one experience of the Sylvan Elf world or the Undying Dynasties world. So when it comes to an ongoing story, what we hope is that these characters will, as often as possible, will recur, and they'll feature in other books, and they'll come about in different ways and bring different views. When it comes to Sylvan Elves characters, what we've done initially is just set them up. We've just explained or given a bit of flavour as to who the characters are or what they do. When when we have the chance and when we have the opportunity to do more works beyond just the army books, and that's hopefully something that will come about in the future, there will definitely be an opportunity to see those characters develop, or new characters to come about. So if we get the chance to do campaigns, for example, there will be a chance to see a bit more detail about that. And the more time we have, the more material we'll be able to produce, and hopefully we can bring more detail in about the characters that we've introduced.
Yeah, because there's actually no special characters in the book. I'm not sure if I'm not sure if I was happy or sad about that, because the special characters in the game are kind of usually, oh, they're really good or they're really bad. But is there going to be any special characters in the future? You mentioned maybe in the campaign or something.
Yeah, so legendary characters, which I think is how we've described them, they'll definitely happen, but I don't know exactly when that will happen. Part of the difficulty there is that we need to work with the rules team in terms of producing special characters that are actually balanced and bring something as well, because I found my problem with many of the special characters of old was they were just a a lot of numbers. They were just higher numbers than some of the other characters. And the special characters that I found interesting were the ones who made something new or changed the character or, brought something different. So it's something that I would definitely like to see, and it's something that we're looking at. But until version 1.0 was out, it was very difficult to imagine how we would be able to have the time to devote to that. I'm hopeful that within the next year we might be able to start at least considering how we can bring in special characters.
Okay, and let's hypothetically say that you have the ability to bring these special characters in. You're allowed to. How much influence do you have over the rules of these characters? Like, for example, I don't know, maybe you have a character who's really good at fighting. I mean, do you have influence over the rules? Can you say, oh, he needs more attacks or whatever?
It's highly theoretical at the moment because we haven't actually engaged in that. But I would hope that we would be able to come up with a background for a character that the rules team would then implement.
Okay.
Or certainly we would work together to work out what types of characters would help with the faction and would make that faction more interesting or more exciting. So I think it will be quite a collaborative process when we do get around to doing that.
And in the same way, if, for example, maybe you're going to write some rules for a new unit, could you maybe like say, okay, rules team, we've come up with this idea for a new unit. I'd like to implement this into the game. I mean, do you have kind of influence over that kind of thing as well, or is it more of like the rules team will say, okay, we have a new unit, can you write some fluff for it?
Well, at the moment, obviously.
Right now we're kind of not able to do that.
The work to date has been very much getting the game into a position where it's stable and people can play it and enjoy it, and a good footing to build on. I think in future what we may find is that some of the ideas that we bring about in the army books, or some of the ideas that we discuss when we're setting up the factions, might feature in terms of how those armies are shaped in the future and what helps to grow them. So certainly when it comes to equiting, I think people are conscious that they have less units than almost every other.
Yeah. You can only have so many different kinds of knights, right?
Yeah, exactly. So lots of the people on those forums are very keen to discuss what could be done, what could be brought in. And if the rules team are looking for that, then it's something that we will give every assistance to try and come up with new ideas. But it's something that we can do for every faction.
Okay, so bringing it back to the Sylvan Elves now. We don't really hear anything about the history or the past of the Sylvan Elves like we kind of used to in old army books. Like before, we would have like almost a timeline from year 0 to year now. Maybe you could tell us something about how the Sylvan Elves came to be, or how they came to live in the forest, or is there a connection between the Highborn Elves and the Dread Elves and the Sylvan Elves, or maybe some kind of like how they interact with each other, or are they friends? I mean, I don't know. I don't know anything about this because there's no history at all. So maybe you could fill that out for the community.
Yeah, I can certainly give a sort of initial glimpse, because the purpose of our army books is not to give a top-down narration. So that's where we differ from some of the army books that people will be used to. And part of that has been not giving just one history. The same will be true. The same is true of the Undying Dynasties. Also, they had because part of their history was the actual construction of how they exist. So that was a bit that was mentioned, and there's less of that in the Sylvan Elves because people are more familiar with elves as a concept. But the Sylvan Elves. There will be more detail that comes out in the main rulebook, in the background compendium. It'll give a bit more of the world history and some of the major events. Our elven race as a whole was one of 2 which were very successful during the Golden Age. And obviously, with the name Ninth Age, we have to give a bit of detail as to why this is the Ninth Age and what was
the 8th, 7th, 6th, 5th ages.
exactly. So there'll be a timeline in the main rulebook that will give a bit more detail, but as per most elven traditions, the elves had their sort of time of ascendancy. They had their time when they were at their peak, and beyond that, various events happened to elves across the world, which caused them to divide into the three groups that we see now. We haven't delineated exactly how all of the elves react to each other, because there will be different situations and there will be different environments, but generally speaking, Highborn Elves and Dread Elves is the rivalry that people expect and look for, but Sylvan Elves have their own relationship with both, and I think particularly in the poem which was released last week, there's a bit of a hint towards maybe a bit of longing or a bit of loss that goes with the Highborn Elves. It's not as simple as just a different culture. It's a sense of maybe they're not quite the true elves that the Sylvan Elves are.
Okay, so maybe it's more the Sylvan Elves are actually the kind of the original ones rather than the Highborn Elves this time around.
That's certainly how they would do it.
Okay. I have a. This isn't a question that we wrote down before we discussed this, but was there a War of the Beard? You can.
Not a War of the Beard, but there's certainly a major conflict between dwarves and elves in our timeline, and that will hopefully become clear pretty soon.
Okay. Yeah. So the next one I wanted to talk about, I want to show the Blade Dancer picture that's in the book. There we go. So this is a cool picture. Like we hear about the Blade Dancers in the book a little bit. You kind of have this kind of mysterious nature to them, which is, I think it's really cool way of doing it, and it also says that they're linked to the gods in some way. I'm not sure if this is in the same way as it was in the previous fluff, or if this is a new angle on it, because they're kind of really mysterious, and I think it says, actually I've written it down as sacred to one or maybe all the elven gods. Maybe you could just talk about like how these blade dancers fit into the society.
Yeah, so well, we saw blade dancers. They're one of the more, well, for me at least, they're certainly one of the most interesting of the elven units. They take a lot of what it sort of is to be an elf, and they take it to extremes. So they take the martial skill, they take the grace, they take the sort of fragility of elves almost. You know, they don't wear armor; they wear as little as possible. So there's a sort of sense that they're living a more primal elven life, and so we wanted to take that and we wanted to give it a character that made it interesting and made it relevant to the Sylvan Elf culture. And so what we did with that was to make the Blade Dancers these sort of acolytes, maybe, I suppose you would say. You know, they fulfill some major role in terms of the religion of the Sylvan Elves, and performing their dances brings that part of the Sylvan Elf culture closer to them.
Yeah, what we saw in the book was each of the kind of the gatherings of the elves was always around some kind of festival or equinox or something like that, and they're obviously really connected to the natural world. But we also saw like a ritual with the Blade Dancer where they kind of pretend to kill a child in sacrifice, and this kind of element of the trickster element. Is that something that was influenced by the previous fluff, or is that something that you actually want to continue with in the Ninth Age as well?
Do you know, it wasn't devised as a trick as such, although that is definitely how it would come across to a human narrator. But I think this is part of where the external view maybe doesn't quite comprehend what the significance of the ritual wasn't aimed at him.
No.
So his take on it is, oh my God, I thought this was happening, and suddenly it didn't happen. But to the elves who were watching, this was just normal, the normal course of things. So really, what hopefully we were trying to get across with that was this sort of darker side to elven religion. It's not just the nice parts of nature. It's all the parts of nature.
Yeah, I just find that one quite an interesting story as well. I just want to ask you real quick. I'm a Sylvan Elf player, and these are my war dancers here, my old war dancers, my blade dancers. And if you look closely, I'm pretty sure you guys have copied my conversion here on the left. I think this one here is exactly the same as the picture, right? Just here. And also the one in the main guy, I'm pretty sure it's exactly the same as this dude here. I don't know if you've been looking at my conversions or.
I can't speak to the inspiration for that particular art. Although I will note that some of the arm positions did change as a result of our head of the art team making a few comments on what was more physically appropriate. So they didn't start in all the positions that they ended up in. But who can say, maybe your models were a source of inspiration for the artwork.
Okay, I just have one quick question about these guys. Obviously, they're pretty naked. Does the Ninth Age have some kind of policy with nudity, or I mean, obviously, you're not going to do any kind of sexual artwork in any of your publications, but do you have any kind of any rules with regards to like nudity or the level or?
It's something of an evolving discussion actually, because not just for the Sylvan Elves, but also for Dread Elves and for Demon Legions, there's a number of units where it may or may not be relevant to the models, and I haven't had the opportunity to come to a sort of definitive decision. I think it will depend on how we view the game overall, and I suppose particularly in terms of whether we're appealing to younger audiences. So I think there's an argument to keeping it family friendly, as well as an argument to say that the artwork can be appreciated in its own right, and potentially it shouldn't be censored. So it's a bit of a balance, and I'm not sure where we'll end up with that one actually.
Okay, that'll be interesting to follow because I'm sure some of the Lust units could have some interesting artwork.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So the next question I have for you is more about the world in general. Like we have a lot of references to other races in the Sylvan Elf Army book. We've talked about a little bit about the other elves, but obviously we have a big Kingdom of Equitaine kind of influence into the story because that's kind of the narrative that's followed. We have a lot of references to the Kingdom of Equitaine, like the Arthurian legend. So we have I think it's like the Sword of Uther is mentioned, and also Percival, which is obviously one of the old Arthurian legends. I mean, are the Kingdom of Equitaine storyline, is that influenced by Arthurian legend, or similar to kind of 5th edition Games Workshop, where they changed it to a bit darker towards the end? I mean, how is the Kingdom of Equitaine influenced by these traditional knightly values and things like that? Just divulging from Sylvan Elves a little bit for the other listeners. Just maybe you could talk about how the fluff of the Kingdom of Equitaine is going to be, like the angle that you're taking on it.
Yeah, so Arthurian legend, I mean, those names aren't directly copied or applied like for like, but they are inspirations to that are derived from the Arthurian legends and those kind of myths. So they will definitely play an important part in how we set up the Kingdom of Equitaine. Um, the scope of, in terms of darkness, I mean, this is something that the players themselves are split on in terms of whether it's something that they want to see or whether it's something that they think should be peripheral. What I think we need to make sure is that we cover the possibility for people to play those types of forces. So there will definitely be an angle of darkness to Kingdom of Ectane, and I think that's true of every one of our factions. We don't want to create pure and good factions that don't have any interesting dark side to them, and we don't necessarily want to create pure evil factions who do everything for malevolent reasons and don't have any logic to what they do. So I think there will be a degree of balancing for all of them, but definitely Arthurian legends will play a significant part in the Aquitaine background.
Okay, we heard about a character called Henri Lionhelm, or Henry Lionhelm. Like, is that like a main character in the game? And will it be a main character in the game, or is that just a passing reference to a character?
It's a passing reference to a character who will have played his part in the history of Aquitaine.
Okay.
But the events of the book are somewhat in the past as opposed to the current day. So there is some time for Aquitaine to move on from that.
Okay. I think one thing that I really liked about the previous fluff, I'm actually a history student in the past. I don't use it at the moment, but I have been, and kind of the parallels that I could draw from our history on Earth, as opposed to whatever world we're recreating. The parallels that I could draw from history were what I found most fascinating actually about the fluff, and this reference to Henry Lionhelm. I was wondering if we're going to see the same thing in the Ninth Age, whether you're going to draw from historical events that we know and put them into the Ninth Age in the same way as we're kind of used to seeing.
Yeah, so to be honest, I think as a history student, you might be more into our fluff than most people. We actually have a couple of people with historical or archaeological qualifications who are part of the team, and it will be a definite part of the development of the Ninth Age fluff. Not necessarily individual events or individual characters, but the themes and the cultures of historical societies will form part of how we structure the Ninth Age world. We don't want it to feel like it's a completely new world that people have to learn from scratch. We want it to feel familiar, but have an original take on the world. So potentially where Games Workshop have moved away from being more closely tied to real world events and real world history, we're quite happy to go slightly more in the opposite direction and take our inspirations, and we're not trying to hide our inspirations and our ties into real world history and events, and hopefully that will help to create something that feels that like it has a depth to it.
Okay, that's really interesting as well. So now I have some general questions for you. Just kind of we've talked a lot about Sylvan Elves and we've talked a little bit about Aquitaine. So I'm just going to give you a quote now, and I'd like you to make a comment on it. So one quote that I read in the book was, "From the frozen taiga of Oskland through the dry shrublands of Arcalia to the steaming jungles of Tafria." There's three places here: the frozen taiga of Oskland, the shrublands of Arcalia, and the jungles of Tafria. Could you maybe put some flesh onto the bones of these places for us? Just maybe the jungles of Tafria sounds very Saurian. Maybe you could just comment on these places a little bit.
Yeah, I mean these are three places where human societies live out with two kingdoms that we've discussed before. Tafria is actually on the wrong side of the ocean for Saurians, at least for their heartland. It's more of our archetype for Africa.
Okay.
Arcalia will definitely feature more in the fluff as it develops. It's sort of southern Europe, that sort of area, and Ostland will feature more in some of the books that are upcoming, being more of the sort of Russia, Eastern Europe type area. So
okay. Something that I think maybe you just let slip was that the story in Ancient Heartland is across the sea. Is that something like South America, maybe? Or
once you see the map, it will be very clear
okay.
where people tend to.
I was just trying to get a spoiler out of you. Okay. I'm just looking through the questions that I've written down. I think we've actually covered a lot of them. One of the things that I thought was maybe a little bit interesting was that I don't know if this is actually going to be in the real one because the book that you sent me was obviously not a fully complete version, but it had all the information in it. The header of each page says Tales of the Fae, Tome 1. What's Tome number 2 going to be?
Tome 2 will involve Thomas, our narrator, journeying to other places and encountering other parts of the elven races.
Ah, I see. So maybe we're going to see the same narrator for the other 2 elven books.
That's definitely possible.
Okay, interesting, cool. Which book is next?
So the next book after the Sylvan Elves book will actually be the main rule book, which we're already working on, and we're hoping to have finished as soon as possible. But that's a fairly sizable.
Yeah, I can imagine.
We're trying to provide sort of fluff and background for as much of that as possible. And once we finish that, we'll be moving on. There's still a little bit of discussion going on, but one of the potential next books will be Warriors of the Dark Gods, because chaos and the role of the Dark Gods in our world is quite a big part that has still yet to be communicated to the players, and not just the chaos players, but a lot of other players will want to know how we're going to handle that. So I think it's important that we do that relatively soon.
Okay, and could you maybe give us a general date, like for the rule book or for the next army book? I mean, you don't have to be very specific, just a ballpark.
Well, I'm hoping that the basic rule book will be done by mid to end summer, and then by autumn, hopefully, we'll have another book that can be released.
Okay, fantastic. So hopefully before Christmas, we're going to see a rule book and maybe one army book.
Yeah, I would say before Christmas, definitely.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, the final question I have for you. Do you have a favourite part of this new book, or do you have a favourite part of the fluff, or something that you really, really, really like and that you'd like to tell us about?
Favorite part? It's really difficult for me to...
Just maybe even a piece of art or a poem or just anything that springs to mind as something that you're really passionate about. You think, oh, this is amazing.
I mean, I would have to say, and it's a shame that it can't be one that we can see, but the very last piece of art in the entire Sylvan Elf book, which you already know which that will be.
This was actually one that I wanted to show, but I wasn't allowed to.
I know, but I feel like it would be such a big spoiler to show that here. But that was a piece of artwork which started out as a small thumbnail illustration, and then once I and the other members of the team saw that piece of artwork, we decided that it was too good not to give it a full page, and I think it sort of summarizes so much of the mystery and the fascination around the Sylvan Elves for me, that I'm really looking forward to seeing how players respond to that. And other than that, as a specific piece of artwork, I think being part of the Sylvan Elf book, helping to draw it together, and sort of showing how we intend to go about things in the Ninth Age generally, has been a really enjoyable exercise, and I'm hopeful that people will enjoy experiencing their faction, and experiencing the themes that go with their faction.
Fantastic. Yeah, so I think that's about wrapped it up. We've almost talked for an hour now. So thank you very much, Edward, for your time. Is there anything you'd like to finish with, or say hello
Uh,
to the community. I think we've
definitely hello to the community. Please be kind. Please go and download the Sylvan Elves book and give us your thoughts. Look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, I think just one thing from me, it's obviously completely open, and if you have comments, both positive and negative, I'm sure the background and art team would be more than happy to hear them and take them on board. This is obviously like an organic process, and it's gonna take a long time to accomplish, and any feedback, positive or negative, is always really important. I'm sure you're happy to get it. Is there a place that people can kind of contact the background art team directly, or if they have ideas or anything?
Well, generally speaking, if they put it up on there is a fluff and background forum, and if people are putting up ideas and discussions, we tend to look at that on a regular basis. If they have specific comments, I would suggest that the Army Support or ABCs could potentially put up a thread. We won't necessarily be able to read every single post, but it would be really good if we had some feedback that was sort of collated, and then we can get an idea of what people like and what we can work on in future.
Fantastic. Okay, so I think you guys have had a lot of background talk from us today, so I think we're going to call it a day there. So again, thank you very much, Edward, for coming on and telling us about the Sylvan Elves, and hopefully we can hear from you again sometime soon, maybe when the new book comes out.
Yep, that would be good.
Okay, thanks guys for listening, and hope you've enjoyed the show. Have a nice weekend and enjoy the book when it comes out.